Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for being part of WorkSafe's webinar, how small business owners can proactively look after their mental health. Hello, good morning. My name is Rob Kelly. I'm the Director of Special Services at WorkSafe, and I'll be your host for the webinar today. Now, while our sessions are virtual this year, our aim for Work and Health and Safety Month remains the same, and that is to keep you up to date. And our focus this year is navigating through COVID-19. Today, we're joined by Judy O'Connell, our guest speaker, and Judy is the Small Business Commissioner, and the group she leads is the Victorian Small Business Commission. It's an independent government agency that advocates on issues affecting people in small business, build their understanding and their rights and responsibilities, and helps them to avoid and resolve disputes. So today, the structure we've put in place is a conversation between myself and Judy that outlines the Commission's response to COVID-19 and also provides some information about the signs of stress and what can be done about them. And remember, if there's anything you need to talk to us about urgently, you can call WorkSafe's advisory line or the emergency line that's available on your screen as I speak. If you would like to join this conversation, you can do so by entering the hashtag HSmonth. And also remembering that any of the resources we reference today will be available on screen at the end of this session. So with that, we'll get into it. So Judy, could I start by asking you broadly, what are the stressors that you are seeing and your organization is seeing in the small business community as part of this pandemic?
Yeah, Rob, the number one stressor at the moment, of course, is cash flow. You know, how do I get the cash that I need to continue? We're at the VSBC, which is the Victorian Small Business Commission, we are seeing a lot of disputes about negotiating rent relief. So, you know, paying that rent is one of the number one cash issues that they have at the moment. So we've been helping over 11,000 small business owners who are tenants and some landlords negotiate rent relief.
So you say rent is one of the major stresses there. Any others that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, look, you know, there's a lot of issues around cash flow, you know, in terms of getting money for stock and staff, which hopefully they'll be on JobKeeper. But I think at the moment, another key stressor is about, you know, how they are going to reopen. Are they, you know, they've got to get their COVID safe plan in place and making sure that happens and that, you know, making sure they don't make any mistakes there. And I think for some, you know, the reality, they've done the sums and they realise that they just can't reopen, and so that stress of, you know, what am I going to do now if I actually have to close my business.
Thanks for that. And as I said, the session today is how small business owners can proactively look after their mental health. How can these issues or challenges or stressors affect well-being?
Yeah, it comes in a number of ways. You know, I think a lot of small business owners like to be in control. You know, they run their own business, they manage their own business, and they control things. And at the moment, they're out of control. They haven't got control over when they can open, you know, how they can open, and what support, in some instances, what support is out there for them. So that's one of the issues that they've got. And I think that sort of comes out in terms of, you know, feeling overwhelmed or anxious, and it's normal at the moment to sort of feel overwhelmed and anxious, but sometimes it gets to being more than just that, and it can come out as being, you know, come out as being angry at some stage, or you know, you start withdrawing from work, from staff. You can't meet deadlines. You just, you know, you can't sleep in some instances. So when it sort of becomes part of a problem, that's when it starts to impact your well-being, and that's when you've got to actually do something about it to get on top of it then, so it doesn't become a huge problem.
And we said at the start that the agency that you lead advocates for issues affecting people in small business and helps them to understanding their rights and responsibilities. We're talking about stressors today and well-being. This is in some ways refocusing the Commission's work. Can you explain or talk a little bit about how, if at all, it has refocused the Commission's work?
Yeah, it has. Our dispute resolution services has always been sort of a key part or key function of the VSBC, and we've found that our workload's increased by about 300% at the moment. A lot of them are supporting, as I said, small business owners, landlords, and tenants to negotiate rent relief where they're having difficulty trying to negotiate rent relief themselves. But a lot of it is also around disputes that businesses might have with other businesses. So any small business that's got a dispute with another business or a government agency can come to us, and we will try and resolve it. And it's a free, at the moment it's all free. We do mediations which are free. We provide advice which is free, because it's recognised, the Victorian Government's recognised that small business owners don't have the funds or the capacity for legal advice in some instances, or representation, although a lot of them will come to the office with legal representation. But we can help them, guide them through that dispute resolution. And at the moment, with our rent relief cases, it's about an 88% success rate. So we're being able to successfully sort of negotiate rent between the landlord or tenant, or a dispute such as you've paid for goods or services and haven't been paid, or you've supplied goods and services and you haven't been paid for it. We'll follow up to make sure that actually happens.
You mentioned a bit earlier on that as small business owners, they're in control. It's their business. They run the business and they're accountable for it. And in some ways, the belief out there can be that small businesses they just carry on. They'll be okay. They'll get through this. Is that a misconception?
Yeah, it is. A lot of business owners, as I said, they're the boss. They're the ones that run the thing, and they're sort of so focused at the moment and making sure that business gets through and can come out the other side of this pandemic and start running again. They're probably also focused on worrying about their staff and their family, and so they put all of these things first before their own mental health. And that's not good. It's not good for themselves, and it's not good for their business, because if you're not on top of your own mental health, then your business is going to suffer anyway. You won't be able to meet those deadlines because you're way too stressed. You won't be able to support family and friends. So I think this time more than ever, you need to put yourself first and focus on your own mental health, so that then you can support your business and others.
And leading into that, one of the key roles and important roles that your agency leads and deals with is dispute resolution, which I'd suggest at any time can be a challenging time, but super tough now with COVID-19. Can you give us some insights? You did mention there about the 88% success rate for resolution between landlords and tenants from a point of view of rent. But can you give us some insights as to how tough it actually is in dealing with the disputes under COVID-19?
Yeah, look, and I'll do this by an example, I think, Rob. But a lot of businesses, one, don't know where all of the support is that is available. Like, all three levels of government, federal, state, and local government, have all provided a lot of support for small businesses. But so, it's important for small business owners themselves to do their homework and make sure to see what they're entitled to. But in terms of rent relief, it is really, if you're a eligible small business owner who's on JobKeeper, you're entitled to rent relief in proportion to that reduction in turnover. And what we're finding is that a lot of tenants will go to their landlord and request that rent relief, and landlords themselves might be suffering through this pandemic and not prepared to negotiate that rent relief. So that's where they can come to us and we can try and support it. we've got a panel of mediators who sit both parties down and will come up with an outcome that for both parties. So mediation is about both parties being able to actually negotiate and come to some sort of arrangement. And we had one, and it was with a pub owner. He had a community pub, and the landlord and tenant came to mediation, and the landlord started off, and he sort of started off saying, I don't know why you can't just have takeaway and do well out of takeaway. I've seen other people who've done well out of takeaway. You seem to just be sitting back and not doing anything, and then expect me to pay and then not pay any rent at all, and I don't think it's fair. And then the tenant came on, and it was all over Zoom, and the tenant came on, and he's in the pub, and he's got this beanie on, and he's got his coat on, and it's all dark, and he sort of said, "Oh, look, I'm sorry, I can't afford to put the lights on because I owe a $15,000 electricity bill, and I can't afford any more than that. I can't even afford to pay that." And he said, "Look, I've tried everything." He said, I'm not a gastro pub. We're a community pub where people come and just have a drink and they're happy, And he said, no one's happy at the moment. And he said, I had, 3 staff who had to go off for COVID testing and they couldn't come back to work. He said, so it just wasn't working and I had to close it all together. He said, if I could walk away now, I would, but I just feel I can't walk away because of the family, friends and the community having a pub here. And once the landlord heard that, the landlord kind of shifted his thinking and he kind of thought, well, yeah, that all makes sense. And the landlord ended up by saying, okay, I'm going to allow you 80% rent relief up until January. And he said, I'm going to also kick in $15,000 so that you can pay that electricity bill. And I think that was a really good example of how we can actually support both the landlord and the tenant to come to some sort of arrangement so those small businesses can keep in business when we can get up and start running again.
Thanks for sharing that, Judy, because that's distressing to hear, and it really leads into the next question is dealing with that and dealing with that distress or the impact on your mental health. And I understand you've worked a lot with Beyond Blue and key stakeholders in this last year or 6 months. Can you give us some insights as to what that is and what's involved and how people can get more information?
Yes, and I think we've got a slide here that'll sort of give us some tips as well. But we worked with Beyond Blue and also with some small business owners who'd had mental health issues and knew what it was like to actually go through mental health issues and run a business, because it is a bit different. If you're trying to run your business and have mental health issues, it is very hard to take time out to actually focus on your mental health. So we thought it was really important to actually develop the Small Business Owners Guide to creating a mental health plan, to be proactive and actually get on top of your mental health and make it a priority.
What does this guide? What does the guide cover?
So it allows you to keep on top of your own mental health. It starts off by asking you to identify what your stresses are. So, is it cash flow? Is it making sure I've got a COVID safe plan? Is it looking after family and friends? So identify what those stresses are. And then what are your triggers? What are the things that actually that are impacting you? Is it that you're waking up in the middle of the night? Is it that you've got this tight, anxious feeling in your stomach you can't get rid of? Or is it that, everything feels too much and you can't be bothered doing anything? But actually identify what it normally is and then do something proactive about it then, rather than waiting until it takes longer. And what are some proactive things that you can do about it? Is it that you need to do some physical exercise? Is it that you need more interaction with people over Zoom? Is it that you need to talk to a counsellor or talk to a trusted person and write down who those trusted people are? And then once you've done that, it's sort of foremost in your mind, if these things start happening, that you actually need to do something about it.
So I suppose in some ways I'm a small business owner. I'm struggling. Mental health can be something that can be hard to talk about, and I think the community is getting better in talking about it. But is there any tips or guides you can say to someone and say, look, I am struggling, I just don't know what to do, or I'm not comfortable to talk about my mental health? What could they do?
So we've got a good example, I think, and there's a graphic here that'll show you. This is on our website. This mental health plan and the example here are on our website, and they're free to download. So please do. And we've got an example there. It's Alex Smith, and it's documented what she did about her own. And rather than going through Alex at the moment, I'm going to tell you my own personal story, because when we had to move to working from home, and we were getting inundated with inquiries and dispute applications from small business owners, it was very stressful. You know, there was an awful lot of work there, and we needed to get staff on to help support small business owners. And I was finding that I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and just couldn't get back to sleep. And it was a bit of an aha moment for me, because I, after doing this sort of for a week on end, I thought, this is my stressor. This is my trigger that I'm under stressed, and I need to do something about it. Otherwise, I'm not going to be any good for anyone. So I actually made myself get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go for a walk every morning. And just getting out there in that fresh air and saying hi, socially distancing, but saying hi to people was enough to lift my spirits, so that I could then go and sit at my dining room table and work for the rest of the day and focus. And I found that after a week of doing that, I was actually sleeping a lot better and able to sort of get up and focus a lot more and not be perhaps as angry with people when things weren't going my way. So I think if I hadn't done that, I would have ended up being a bit of a basket case and being very stressed. And that's where it can start getting overwhelming, and what you don't want is it to end up in anxiety or depression, and then really have an issue about it. So for me, it was about getting on top of it early, and it might not be walking for people, it might be sort of gardening, or we're finding people are baking, or it might even be over a couple of drinks, a Zoom meeting with friends. But what it is that you've actually got to do to take time out for yourself, to make yourself feel better during this time, is very important. And of course, in that example that we show with Alex Smith, it also goes through some of examples of different types of stresses, different types of triggers, and then who might be your trusted people that you do want to talk to or confide in. Because I think, as you said earlier, Rob, mental health is still got a bit of a stigma about it. A lot of people don't want to talk about mental health. They feel that if you've got a mental health issue, you're a failure. You're not. It's something that we all need to work on. And I think you talk to anyone, they'll tell you at the moment that they feel at some stage anxious or overwhelmed. And so the more we actually talk about it and the more we do things about it, the less stigmatized it will become. My great aim is that, if you had a broken leg, you'd go into work and everyone would get the stool and they'd put it, right on your thing and get you a cup of tea. Whereas I want that if you go in and say, look, I'm struggling with my mental health at the moment, that you'd have just as many people come up and say, what do you need? How can we help you? How can we support you? And I think things like talking about it more and more is very important.
Thank you for sharing your personal story. As you said, it's important to share that. And I think it's a good example you said there where someone, unfortunately, they break a bone, but people understand that and they go, well, that's broken. But they don't necessarily see, or it's not tangible to them, that someone is actually has a mental health or welfare issue that is either transient or can, as you said, lead into more anxiety or depression based. And talking about that more and understanding it more and realizing it is an injury like any other, and having the support around you and the conversations around you, I think that's a really, really good example. So thank you very, very much for sharing that. Resources behind that. So I'm not doing well, I'm struggling. You've mentioned the guide, you've mentioned the mental health plan. What else is out there for me as a small business owner to be able to draw on and lean on, whether I'm, my well-being is declining or I am I'm struggling?
Yeah, I think first off, if you are in control and has done as much of your research and homework as possible to know what you need to do to get ready and be able to run your business again as soon as possible, or ramp up if you're already sort of working from home. I think that the Business Victoria website has got an awful lot of information there around what supports are available, what your COVID safe plan is. They've got a hotline as well, so use that. The local councils are doing an awful lot of work with small business owners at the moment, and I know some of them have even got concierges who will walk them through how they need to sort of start back up again and get ready. So I would use those resources as much as possible. Get as many of those funds, the grants and support that's available. Use as many of those and do your research for that. But if you are struggling with your mental health, of course you've got Beyond Blue, and they've got a 24/7 counselling line. But the Victorian government's also developed, it's called Partners in Wellbeing, and there's a hotline there, and it's 1300 375 330. So Partners in Wellbeing, and they're available till 10 o'clock at night and also on the weekends. And as well as counselling services specifically for small businesses, they also have financial advisors as well that's also free of charge that you can talk to. And I think sometimes being a small business owner is a bit different. And so having that Partners in Wellbeing, where they've got people who understand what it's like to be running a small business and have mental health issues, is really important. So I would suggest that you contact them. And the other one is Heads Up, that's got a lot of information there about how you can support your staff as well through this, because I think we all know that sometimes the staff have also anxiety and stresses during this pandemic.
Thank you. And just to summarise there, what I think you said there is, so Business Victoria, they have an information hub on the web. So if you go in there, there's a lot of information available to small businesses. Local councils are doing a lot of work in that space. And then, as you said, their Partners in Wellbeing are available until 10 o'clock at night and on weekends on 1300 375 330. So that's 1300 375 330. You did mention Beyond Blue and also Heads Up. So there's a lot of information available, and encouraging people to avail of that and take the support as they need it.
That's right, yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So Judy, what I'd like to do now is go to some questions and throw them to yourself, and we work our way through them.
Sounds good.
Okay, first one off. How do I help a staff member who won't admit they are struggling with mental health issues?
Well, yeah, That's a tough one. I think, it's up to the staff member to feel like they can open up or not. I think your responsibilities are perhaps to provide some tools there that they can use, and they might use those. So, all of those, Beyond Blue, there's Lifeline as well. I'd suggest also that you go to that Heads Up Space website and actually have a look there, which are some tips and traps that you need to look at when dealing with staff. But really, it's to try and be supportive and provide that those tools. You're not a counsellor, so you shouldn't try to be a counsellor, but providing that that support and guidance would be recommended.
I suppose you shared your story, and that's from my point of view. I've had over my career, I've had personally myself, but also team members, and it becomes a really conversation of trust. And as you start to share and open yourself, others can see that as well, because many of my colleagues over periods of time have had mental impacts as they've gone. So I think it's sharing that and being as open as you can with that. I think that's a really important part of communication and discussion and trust. The next question is, as people become more and more mentally fatigued by COVID-19 restrictions, how do we help support our workforce and keep them focused?
Yeah, I think it is. Fingers crossed we will be able to sort of work back. But I think it's making sure that you keep in touch with your staff, making sure that they are okay. I know we've done some sort of team events that sort of, I think what's missing when you're all working from home is that sort of, the chats in the kitchen, the sort of, drinks that perhaps you had, or, going out for coffee with people. And it's how you can do that a bit different. We still have quarantinis, we call them, on a Friday afternoon. We just open it up to chats, and we've had, trivia nights via Zoom, or trivia, afternoon via Zoom. We've had an art show where people had to show a different, a photo of an art, and then some how you've changed it to reflect what it's like in COVID at the moment. So there are some sort of things that you can do to sort of make sure that you keep the cohesive group going. And of course, the other part of it is for work is to provide context and to keep that communication lines opening. So, let them know what's happening all the time and what you are going to be doing when you start back up again.
And what I'd like to do is just we did a session last week on working from home, and a lot of that aspect of the challenges as both employer and employees. One of our organizational psychologist, Libby Brooke, was part of that panel, and one of the things she spoke about is those type of challenges and staying connected, and the sense of connection and trust and being collaborative and consulting as you go through. So I think that's a good webinar to get download, which I believe will be available at the end of November. So next one is, how can we be responsible for keeping our community safe when we have no expertise in controlling transmission? I think that seems like a really broad kind of question, but I suppose in the context of small business, I'd couch that question of saying, well, if I'm a small business and I'm opening, what can I do to make sure what I'm doing isn't going to contribute towards a transmission?
Yeah, I think that's right. You can only control your own environment, and there are COVID safe plans that are available for industries, and they are, again, all on that Business Victoria website. So I suggest as long as you research that, follow that, there's a checklist there as well, make sure you're doing that, then you will be responsible. And that's all you can do, is control your own environment. You can't control the rest of the community. And I think that's an important thing to remember.
Next one now is about your particular area and your commission itself. Is what is the Victorian Small Business Commission specifically suggesting to small business owners as their first step if they know they are seriously at risk with mental health issues?
if the business owner is at serious risk. So if you're at serious risk, so you've already identified that you really are struggling, you really are overwhelmed, I would suggest that you get professional help, that you either contact your doctor, you contact Beyond Blue counselling service, or you contact a counsellor. That would be my number one thing. I think what we're trying to do with the mental health plan is really to, if you're not at that stage, if you're actually at a stage where you can identify that you are getting stressed and anxious, do something about it then. But if you're at a stage where you are feeling, depressed, you're very anxious, you're overwhelmed, then please get professional help.
And part of that could also be calling a helpline just to talk it through.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. This one's about going back to the socialization aspect of things, and I find that friends use Zoom or specifically similar platforms for work, and are just tired of being on calls. They don't want to use it for socializing. Any advice on how to connect socially?
Yeah, look, sometimes it's nice just to have a phone call rather than to have the Zoom. And I find that, I do that. I sort of mix it up a bit as well by actually talking to people on just by phone. And Messenger's another one. I've got a group of ladies that we play virtual bridge. And we've got on WhatsApp, and we'll just type, funny things or messages during the day, and you don't have to even talk to them, but it's a great way to sort of still catch up. So I would mix it up, because I'm like you get a bit Zoom fatigued sometimes.
Thank you. Thanks for that. The next one I'm going to take is a statement, and it's absolutely brilliant sharing your experience with mental illness. Many thanks. And I'm going to pause on that one. I do think it is very important that, as you said, I can have a broken arm and people can see the cast and sign it and so on. But with mental injuries and mental harm, the community is still learning to understand that more so. And the more we share and talk about the fact we have had challenges at different stages, as I said, I have myself as well. I think it's important that we share that you can get through it. There is a lot of support and help out there. The challenge is taking that first step to go, I've got a problem, and there's support out there for me. Do you want to expand a little bit more on that one, Judy?
Yeah, look, and I'd say the other thing too is that, and I briefly touched on it, that there are some businesses who are just not going to get through this. They will not be able to. And I think it's really important that they're not a failure, because this pandemic is nobody's fault. It's just happened to us. And so, having feelings of guilt won't help anyone. So just remember that there's a lot of other people in the same situation. A lot of people are feeling exactly the same as you're feeling at the moment, and we will get through it. But that you should actually, talk about mental health, do things proactive about mental health, and put yourself first, and actually do something that makes you smile or feel engaged or happy.
Can you recommend any sleep strategies?
Actually, you know what? Although I am sleeping a lot better now, our work actually is providing a sleep counsellor, which I'm going to dial into or ring up in a couple of weeks. So unfortunately, I'd have a lot more thoughts about it then. But when I don't sleep, I make myself focus that I can't think about work at all, focus on other things and trying to get back to sleep. But then I won't let myself sleep in. I used to sort of, I've been awake for 2 hours, so I'm going to give myself a sleep in, but I actually make myself get up early, and that sort of regulates it. But I'm no sleep expert, so I'm sure you could Google a lot of information about sleep support.
Thank you. And one of the sessions, as I said last week, you spoke about working from home. Part of the challenge is, because we're now working from home, having a routine of being able to say, this is my workplace, I start my work, I finish my work, and now I'm home again. There was also discussions similar about sleep routines, having a routine in place that helps you get through and settle your mind or get into a sleep routine that just helps you drift off in many ways. So as you said, there's a lot of information online and support is available for you on that one as well. So thank you. What advice would you give the hospitality industry who don't use Zoom as much or not office-based to stay in touch? I think you've answered that, but is there any more you want to add specifically to, say, the hospitality industry?
No, I guess you can sort of be, I guess you're all in the same environment really. So you've got those, I assume most of you are sort of on the premises, COVID safe, but still on the premises. So again, you still should have some sort of team activities just to make sure that you're all not working full time, which I think in the hospitality industry can be one of the issues where you just focus on work and nothing else. So I'd mix it up a bit with also having some social activities.
No worries. And I'm very mindful of the fact that the Chief Health Officer also has guidelines out there about social interactions, and as long as you're meeting them, that's their opportunities available to you as well. But with the changing nature of those from time to time, you need to make sure you're up to date on what the Chief Health Officer requirements are. Not a question, but a comment. There's a lot of emotional impact of seeing your dream disappear. I've been in business since 1989, and the idea of having to throw it all in is more than heartbreaking. How would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, look, I can understand that. I think it must be really terrible. And I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I'm going to tell this story about my father. When I was 16, we had a farm, and cattle prices were plummeting, and we were really struggling. And my father had severe depression and just stayed in bed for a year, and we struggled on. And it wasn't until somebody came, and a good friend came and told him that he needed to do something different. This wasn't working. It wasn't him that was a failure. It was just the circumstances, and he needed to do something different. And he actually took that advice and got a job working as a tour operator for a bus company. He then bought his own bus company and sold it at the age of 80. And so sometimes, yes, it's heartbreaking and it's your dream, but there may be something good that comes out of it, and it may be something else that you're able to focus on.
And again, thanks for sharing your story. I think this is a statement again, but it reflects on what you're saying. And this is exact words, a statement of thanks to you both, especially Judy. Judy, you have come across as so genuine, real, and down to earth. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for your leadership. So I think that is important, that by sharing our stories, by sharing the challenges we all have at different times, but more importantly, there is support out there. You can get it. Reaching out for that support is what becomes probably the most important. So what I'll ask you to do is, if your final takeout, or what is the summary you'd want to give to the small business community from yourself as a commissioner? Yeah, look,
first of all, I'd like to thank each and every one of you, because I think you've done it extremely tough, and from the majority of you, you are hanging in there. You're making sure that you are ready to start up again. And I'd say that's what you need to do. You need to work out how much cash you actually need to start back up again for the next 12 months. You need to get all the support that you can if you haven't already. And you need to get those COVID safe plans in place, and then you'll be in a really good position to be able to actually start back up again. But remember that you're the most important person for your business, and so your mental health is the most important thing. And so make sure that you are mentally healthy and fit and ready to start back up again, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you. And I'm just going to come back around, and this will be the last question for you, is can you go run through the resources available for small business owners?
So for information about how you can keep continuing as a business, it's the Business Victoria website, so businessvic.gov. It's also your local council will have a lot of information, as will the federal government JobKeeper is important information. If you need help with your mental health, then it is Partners in Wellbeing, and the helpline there is 1300 375 330. And they have counsellors who understand. Some of them are small business owners themselves who understand what it's like to be running a business and have mental health issues. And on top of that, they've got free financial counsellors who can talk you through how some advice on how you can get through with your cash flow. So call them. And of course, Beyond Blue has a 24/7 helpline. They've also got a great website, and Heads Up has got a great website on how to support your staff who might be having mental health issues.
Thank you for that, Judy, and thanks for everybody else for sharing and the questions that have come through. It's much appreciated. So, Judy, thank you very much for sharing the profile of the Victorian Small Business Commission and the important work that you do. And I think it's fair to say that you and WorkSafe Victoria are working to ensure that workers and small business owners are supported during these really tough times. So I thank you for that one. So just to finish up, if you have any questions specifically, you can get in touch with us, and that's okay. And any of the resources, as I mentioned, that were mentioned today will be available on the screen at the end of it. But what I would like to finish off by saying is this is a challenging area. It is a tough time, particularly for small business owners. There is a lot of support out there available to you. Please avail of that. And on behalf of Judy, myself and WorkSafe, I'd like to thank you for joining us today.